Bonjour, bienvenue à la journée
Good
éducative.
morning and welcome to the educational day of the RQMO, the Quebec Coalition for Orphan Diseases, this 2022 event as part of our month of February on the theme of diagnostic errancy, the odyssey of those without diagnosis. This is the culmination, the apex of our month of February in the context of the International Day of Rare Diseases, which will be held on February 28th. So quickly, for those of you who have joined and don't know who we are at the RQMO, we operate a center which is the iRare Center, which is an information and support center for rare diseases, for any rare diseases and non-diagnosed diseases. We can help a person navigate the health system to try to find their diagnosis. Someone can call us, anybody can call us for any rare disease, and it could be a natural helper, it can be a family member, relatives, or even health professionals. We also disseminate information mostly through our Facebook page. So we disseminate information about the issues of rare diseases, the research on rare diseases, and any new research. I'm sorry, I'm hearing other people speak. Oh, okay, let me continue. So we know that in Quebec, there's more or less 700,000 people with a rare disease, including 500,000 children. And over time, there's 40 or 50 people of these persons will remain undiagnosed. We spoke during the whole month of the challenges of people who are looking for a diagnosis. It can be long. Many surveys have been conducted around the world. Depending on the survey, it varies. It takes from 5 to 8 years to get a diagnosis. That's just an average, but there are people for whom it can take more than 10 years, and some people will never get a diagnosis anytime in their life. We spoke a lot about the consequences, the medical consequences, about having misdiagnoses, inappropriate treatments, difficulty of doing genetic counseling. Of course, we will speak a lot about this today with testimonials and workshops. We'll speak about the psychosocial difficulties, the uncertainty, how hard it is to access services, the distress that it causes, and the loss of confidence in the healthcare system in certain cases. We could say that there are three types of diseases that are undiagnosed. Those that have not been diagnosed, those are those who are just on their way to get a diagnosis. All kinds of exams and tests have been done, and the physicians and doctors are doing what they can. It could take 1 or 2 more years, but they will receive a diagnosis. And there are also those who will probably never receive a diagnosis. And there are those also, as we see very often on our iRare centers, those who are diagnosed as psychosomatic. I will come back to this. We know that there is between 7,000 and 8,000 diseases, new diseases are found every week. So we can't ask physicians and health professionals to know all those diseases. Most of them are ultra rare. And so there are diseases that doctors will never see during their training or during their whole career. During our month of February, you might have seen that we had a series of webinars, which we called Zebinars. And actually, those are, we had speakers who made presentations about initiatives and research projects, innovations to reduce that time frame for diagnosis. We had Nicolas Garnier from Pfizer, who is part of an international research team who They will use new generation genetic sequencing of newborns to screen for some diseases, and they will also use AI, artificial intelligence, and digital techniques in these cases. Same thing for Ms. Anne de Bergen and Nicolas Garcelon. They're in a project together with their QMO, by the way, and with the University of Sherbrooke. They're located in France, and they will also use artificial intelligence to access data in medical files and analyze those data. We also had Serge Rivet, a researcher who is the director of the research center at the Laval University. He spoke about his PRISM project, which is a project of exomic sequencing through which he could get diagnoses for family here in Quebec. Ms. Christine Kernohan, also a researcher and a biologist in molecular genetics. So she's a molecular geneticist. She is in the newborn screening program in Ontario, and she is also in the Care for Rare project. For years, they have discovered and identified genes associated with diseases for which the people were not getting any diagnosis. And we also identified new diseases. We had Sharon Terry from Genetic Alliance. They're starting an initiative to help the poorest people around the world, the most helpless people around the world, to help them get access to a diagnosis of a genetic disease. And finally, on Thursday, we had the pleasure of listening to Frank Béraud from Montreal in Vivo, and he is part of a group of life sciences, including our RQMO, Coalition for Rare Diseases in Quebec. He presented the main lines of a plan which we want to present to the Department of Health and Social Services and to the Department of the Economy and Innovation, mostly to get funding for research on rare diseases. So there are recordings of those presentations, which are already on our website, and others are still to come. I thank very much all these speakers who wanted to inform us about their project during the month of February. We would also like to speak to you about solutions. Since it was founded, the RQMO started by, well, what we did first is we conducted a big survey. We had forums and colloquia, symposia with workshops, a summit on rare diseases with a lot of different speakers in 2015. And of course, thousands of people have contacted us in our iRare Center, so we could take the pulse of what people were experiencing, and people expressed what they were going through, and we defined and they asked for the solutions we could bring. For that, we made a proposal, which is a strategy, the Quebec strategy on rare diseases in 2015. That document was sent to the government, and the working group had this document in hand. And then in 2020, during our activity, during the International Day, there was the announcement of the Advisory Committee on Rare Diseases that was created by the Department of Health and Social Services of Quebec, MSSS. And in January, very recently, we have been consulted, as well as other rare disease associations, about certain points that on which they want to move ahead at the department. And they announced actually that they will soon publish a Quebec policy on rare diseases this year in 2022 with certainty. So as a solution, we presented what you expressed, you patients, parents, relatives, helpers, natural helpers, in all the consultations we conducted. What came out the most in those consultations? What came out the most was to sensitize and train physicians and other healthcare professionals to rare diseases and give them resources. Train them not on the 7,000 or 8,000 rare diseases, but about the specificities of similar diseases, what you experience specifically because you have a rare disease, the difference between the disease and COVID, and also to train and coach healthcare professionals about a diagnostic approach, put in place a directory of experts and a network in our healthcare system so that physicians are aware of this, whether they're family physicians, general practitioners, or urgentologists, so that they know where to refer their patients to experts for any disease, even if as much as when they suspect a diagnosis, as well as for management of an identified disease, and genetic services also. We can see that sometimes doctors don't know when to refer. They don't necessarily want to refer because they think it might not be genetic. So there's not enough genetic resources, geneticians and so on, to see all the patients in a timely manner. It can take years sometimes to get genetic counseling. And also we propose also solutions for support, patient support during that diagnostic errancy period. It's clear that support would be needed for people who have an unnamed disease, whether for the people who have the disease, the relatives, the parents, the natural helpers. So as I said, there are some solutions that are already in place, some solutions that were presented during our month of February. Let's go through these three categories of diseases. There's those without a diagnosis, as we call them, the non-diagnosed people, and especially people who have no diagnosis. And more, we use genetic sequencing technologies. We saw 2 projects on that, but it's mostly in research that people have to meet the criteria to access the research project. Of course, what would help would be if those technologies became mainstream or at least accessible for clinics, for clinical work. There is the molecular genetic diagnosis board that will be created in 2022, and we hope these things will be more accessible to everyone. There's also the undiagnosed. Why does it take so much time? Maybe they will never get a diagnosis in their whole life, or they'll get an uncertain or ambiguous diagnosis. What could those things be? It could be a genetic diseases. There could be variations or mutations that are not yet identified with the technology. And there's a new technology, which is genetic sequencing, that is being developed and emerging. It could also be diseases that are not associated with a single gene. When there's a single gene, it's easier to identify. It could be polygenic diseases, as we call them, or even a multifactorial diseases where there's other factors, environmental factors, external factors, hormonal factors that play a role. And then there are the diseases that we could say are non-recognized. Several patients use that word when they say my disease is not recognized. Actually, there's not a list of rare diseases in Quebec and the difference about those that are recognized or non-recognized for services in the health department or in the network. But some are unrecognized. Some diseases are unrecognized in the sense that they're not well known enough by the doctors. And sometimes there is doubt in the physicians' minds about the existence of those diseases. And there is also unknown diseases. Increasingly, research work and publications appear and emerge about autoimmune diseases, the microbiota, the microbiome. It seems that the environment plays a very important role in those types of diseases. It is said that they are increasing in frequency. It's possibly due to problems in our environment, and genetic always plays a role, of course, but those are complex diseases, so difficult to diagnose. And we will certainly discover new ones. Let me come back to those people who are diagnosed as psychosomatic, because we want to speak about this more and more. I think that people who have been victims, quote unquote, of this psychosomatic diagnosis would like to speak about this in the medical field, in the medical circles, because unfortunately, we suspect according to all the testimonials we get at our IRARE center and elsewhere, that those people are often sent to a psychologist or a psychiatrist. They're labeled with different type of psychological or psychiatric diagnoses, while it's actually a rare disease. So we hear phrases like, there might be many of you who have heard from a doctor or another health professional, it's in your head, your symptoms and your signs, that can't be. I've never seen this. It's impossible. It can't be. And a person who has a lot of symptoms, it seems to be multisystemic, then doctors will say, there's no relation between your different symptoms. It's just independent. It's just a chance event. Or a doctor says, I had a patient with these diseases that you're proposing to me, but you're not like him or her. So it's probably not that. And some people say for certain diseases that we suspect, they say, I don't believe in this disease. There are diseases for which there's a prejudice or a bias, or the medical environment, there's not enough of a consensus. It's mainly due because they don't know these diseases, because in other countries, it's not the case. There are clinics and it works. So, or what we hear also is this disease does not exist in Quebec. Saying that is pretty incredible, or surprising, let's say, because basically out of the 7,000 and 8,000 diseases, 80% of them are genetic. Any of those diseases can emerge in a person living in Quebec at some time. There are diseases that are more frequent in certain countries and diseases that are more frequent in Quebec than other countries, but we can't say that the disease cannot not be present in Quebec. So we see the cycle that these people go through their diagnostic errancy. And they start by seeing a lot of doctors, and they are not believed, and the various diagnoses they get is somatoform, psychosomatic, conversion factor, fictitious or fake trouble. It's the Munchausen. We think that a person can invent their symptoms, and there's a Munchausen by proxy also, which it's a parent that invents this for their child. Those are troubles that exist in psychiatry that can be diagnosed, but we believe that it's very rare. But unfortunately, there are people who have real rare diseases who are included in those diagnoses. Those people are sent to a psychiatrist or a psychologist, and what often happens, we get a lot of testimonials that psychologists and psychiatrists do see that the patient actually suffers and really has a disease, and that people get back to see a physician. A lot of specialists looking for a diagnosis, but the person will often say, am I crazy? Sometimes patients start to believe that their disease is not real and the doctors are right. And of course, they will consult. They consult because with all this stress and this diagnostic errancy, it's difficult to bear with all the uncertainty. So we have testimonies. We will see testimonials about that. So it's a vicious circle. And some of these people at one point will get a diagnosis. And we know it can take years. And then there's a management of this disease that has to come into place, but others will never get a diagnosis or will wait a long time for it, and they will go back into the cycle where they are not believed. And there's a lawyer called Mr. Jean-Pierre Ménard, a lawyer specialized in health in Quebec, who even called the syndrome of the page before. Namely, once it's been written in your medical file that it could be psychosomatic, you seem to be, you work too hard at finding a diagnosis which is not yours, or any note that stays in the file which alludes to a psychiatric disease. Once it's in the file, the next doctor who reads that can be influenced by that note, and that doesn't help advance things to look for a diagnosis. So I think we will discuss this today in a workshop with Dr. André Yargeau, how she was trained and educated in medicine to not think about rare, but think it's psychosomatic first. And we are talking about having a discussion in Quebec to speak about a culture of doubt, as they did in France during their first national rare disease plan that started in 2005. And there's even doctors who collaborate with us who speak about a culture of humility with physicians who should admit that they don't know everything and there can be something different that they don't know in terms of diagnosis, and dare think about rare, dare think rare. And as Dr. Yargeau will tell us, in addition to say, and if it was one of the rare diseases, we could also say, and if it was not a psychosomatic or somatoform, we have, I think I put it here, last Saturday, we had our Génie en Rare contest with some 30 medicine students from 3 faculties of medicine. This is a contest, it's a quiz we conducted on rare diseases. And there were questions about specific diseases, but there was also these types of questions based on those types of statements by patients and doctors. We wanted to sensitize them about thinking rare and not conclude immediately that it's psychosomatic, or and to listen to the patient well to make the diagnosis. Students studied well and performed very well on that quiz, and we hope they will well informed our 150 questions about the approach to rare diseases, the rare diseases, genetic diseases, and so forth. During our month of February, we had on our Facebook page several testimonials of people telling us the time it took for them to get a diagnosis for their rare disease. We will give you time to express yourselves also about this. And we will have testimonials today. We have testimonials by an adult living here in Quebec who has been looking for a long time for a diagnosis, the mother of a boy. All the persons who will be presenting today had an experience in some form of diagnostic errancy. And we will speak about this later on. We'll speak about what the RQMO does in addition to its rare health. We put in place a rare community for people without a diagnosis. You can join that community of the undiagnosed. And today we are launching in French the kit that was done by the Rare Disease Foundation. The former president of this foundation will come to testify. So this is our day. And I want to thank all our partners who made possible all those activities during the month of February, all those webinars, Génie en Rare quiz, and the day we're having today, and other projects we are putting in place at the RQMO. So thanks very much to you and to them. Let me come back. And for the next 20 minutes, I will give you the floor. We will give you the floor. Today is your day. That's what it is. Lots of people will testify about their situation. And you participants, if you wish to tell us what is your diagnostic errancy process? How long did it take to have your disease diagnosed, if it is diagnosis, or if you still don't have a diagnosis? And maybe you could tell us, well, we won't have time to listen to all the stories of diagnostic errancy, but if you could just tell us what was the most challenging to you and what solution you see to that. If we could have brief interventions like that, number of years of errancy, or if you don't have any diagnosis, what was the hardest for you and what solutions do you propose? We have until 10:14, 10. We will listen to you. So I will leave my moderator, Luc, the general manager, tell us whether there are hands raised. No raised hand. No one wants to express how long it took for them to get a diagnosis, or any comment, or any comment about my presentation. Do you have any questions about the seminars we held, the Génie en Rare, the rare genius in rare quiz we proposed, the rare disease policy that's coming in Quebec? Oh, good. We wanted to give you the floor, but no hand is raised. Oops, I think I saw someone. I did see a hand. Oh, I don't see them. Who is it? I see Miss Annie Germain. Okay, thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me? She has the floor. All right. So I have a rare form of breast cancer. I was lucky. I was diagnosed in just a few days, but I would say that even with the diagnosis, my challenges did not stop there. Even very recently, I'm still in a process of changing oncologists, because the oncologist who was following me, even if I was followed at the SHIM, it did not make sense. It's a person that was totally impossible for me. I decided to change hospitals because I was not satisfied with what was I had good treatments, but I didn't trust that doctor. And about what could happen to me in the future if my disease progressed. In my case, the diagnosis was easy. It's more what happened afterwards. What strikes me the most is that despite the millions of dollars invested in breast cancer and the rare forms of breast cancers are not studied. So it frustrates me a lot. Yes, absolutely. There are rare forms of common diseases which are not very well known. Rare cancers do exist, and they affect thousands of people, and oncologists don't know them all. And of course, we're moving towards what we call personalized medicine. So even common cancers or any other rare diseases or common diseases, we're currently subdividing them in sub-diseases associated with a specific gene or even with a specific mutation of a gene. So it's more difficult for all those rare conditions, as some people call them. But what I understood from your intervention is the importance of getting a second opinion. I don't know if it was easy for you, but of course, there are people who, since they're not listened to too well in the health environment, or if they've been waiting for a diagnosis for years, they might not want to have a second opinion. We're supposed to have the right in our health care system to have a second opinion about our health problems. However, possibly it's not that easy to do. Even for you, it's difficult. You don't want to insult or shock your treating physician, but it's a right we have to get a second opinion. In my case, I just switched doctors. I could not continue with him because he told me something. I replied and I brought to him scientific objections that contradicted what he says. He didn't like that. He said that he was just waiting for my agreement to transfer my file to another person. And that's what I did. And since the other doctor who treats cancer at the hospital I didn't like him, I just decided to change hospital, quite simply. But for diagnosis, I was lucky because it's a doctor who had just finished his studies and he had seen a case during his residency. So he thought about this immediately. It's not because a doctor has no experience that he cannot detect things. No, absolutely. It could be the young guy. It could be that by chance there's a physician who's seen some type of disease, some rare disease, or it could be a curiosity of a young doctor.
We have another person by the name of Suzanne Belanger, I believe I see. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Hello. I don't have a rare disease. I'm Joanne's sister who will give her testimonial earlier. And I wish to thank you and congratulate you for all the work that you're doing. It's key, critical, and it's very difficult for people with a rare disease. And it's also very difficult for their loved ones. It calls for a great deal of support and listening. I wasn't always equipped to hear Joanne in her journey, in her challenges. Today, I am more attuned, but emotionally, it's incredible. The support, the assistance, the listening this requires. I know there's a support group. I don't know if there's assistance for the loved ones and if this may be useful, because I felt totally helpless, powerless in view of what Joanne would report to me. And it led myself to deal with my own challenges because I was unable to be a good listener. So I think support is needed for both the loved ones and the one suffering from the disease. I don't know for how long this foundation has been in existence. I just discovered you this year, and I find this totally key and critical to continue this work. And I find this wonderful, all the developments and advancements to diagnose earlier and to promote awareness, the medical corps and everybody presenting with a rare disease. And that's what I wanted to tell you today. Thank you. Well, thank you, Ms. Belanger, and thank you for being alongside your sister. Yes, it is difficult for the loved ones. There is an impact on the loved ones and the family when somebody is seeking a diagnosis. We shall launch this afternoon the guide, the Rare Disease Foundation Guide, inspired from a guide authored in Great Britain, and we translated it in French. We want to make it available, and it's talked about in there. There were interviews. This guide is especially focused on parents of children for whom they are seeking a diagnosis, and these suggestions can also apply to adults. And it's mentioned the experience of several individuals to lose friends, family members, because especially in the case of so-called invisible diseases, when you're not in a wheelchair, when you don't have a visible malformation, and when it just does not show, it is more challenging to convince people. And you shouldn't have to convince them, but it's certainly more difficult to convince people that you really are suffering from something and that you even feel chronic pain. And we heard this in our survey, people telling us that the family finds they're exaggerating, they're just calling for attention, and it's all in their head. And some of them are told this by their family members. It's very difficult. Therefore, and for parents of children, it calls for a great deal of attention, especially when a child is sick. Even for adults at one point, you can't carry out all of the activities you wish to do. And we see it. People say it. They lose friends. They lose family members, contact. Therefore, it all adds up to the distress, and it's cumulative. And Joanne, Carolyn, will especially address this, but these are testimonials we've collected over the years. And in the guide, there are tips, advice, and suggestions. For some, it's sad because at times one must have to accept to burn their bridges with people and accept not to see them or speak to them because they're more likely to hinder your psychological state more than anything else. And so it's very difficult. Therefore, within our rare community, as we said, this is intended for people without a diagnosis, but clearly throughout all of this, we also want to assist families, loved ones who are grappling. So caregivers and families as well who are grappling with this, and to also build with you. I believe there's another raised hand. Nathalie Martel. Let me see. Can you hear me? Yes, yes. Firstly, I'm going to break the ice. Second, I have no Zoom experience. I discovered it with you. So I want to break the ice. And I totally agree with everything you've done in the last week. In fact, as the person before me, it is of primary importance. My case, I am without a diagnosis. It's been 17 years. It's something that is emerging. Let's call it environmental. And if there's anything that I observed, that physicians, sometimes I wonder if we're living on the same planet or not. They are totally unaware of everything and anything that can be endocrinian disruptive, anything that is tied to the environment. I have very, very specific examples targeted, very true, that occurred 17 years ago. As a result, I ended up with all the issues I have today. I have 2 lesions in the cranium in terms of the pituitary gland and whatever else. And sometimes I feel I'm in a nightmare. I'm living a nightmare because this is something they're not aware of. And you must suspect that ultimately in which category I find myself? Well, it's psychiatric. And it is so, involving my integrity. I can't express it. Initially, I felt like that, but over the years, and initially, I was enthusiastic about science, and I would go into my own file. I hardly ever had any GP. And so I have 2 cases of documents because I do my own research, always have done. And the important sentence that you mentioned earlier, listen to yourself, it will give you the diagnosis. If we gave ourselves the trouble of listening of what I am saying, of what I'm presenting in terms of information, I try to make their life easier. I prepared tables, I made connections, relationships between things, and it's a nightmare. And I have achieved this 17th year. Over the past few months, I sort of crashed because my motivation got a severe blow. And so I would always knock on thousands of doors every time. Nobody did so for me. Nobody did it on my behalf. Not a GP, as you said. There are collateral damages to all of this, huge ones. And today, I must say that I am literally alone in this adventure, and I have nobody to support me, nobody who believes me regardless. And at times I have to hold back because some of the answers I get back, you must have a pretty good idea. I'm not the one that has tripped the CT scan or the imaging device. And if I'm good enough to create lesions in my cranium, well, then perhaps money would be growing on trees. And And so we could pursue medical investigation. The process is excessively difficult. There you go. Thank you. Thank you, truly. This is a story we often hear. Listen, I said it. Diseases without a diagnosis, you have unknown diseases. And at one point, we are under the impression that in medical sites and books and volumes, all the diseases are already pre-identified and the knowledge is already available. But if we follow today's literature, we even see that there are new things, and I've spoken about those autoimmune diseases and the microbiome. There's serious research that's been done on this, and we've made connections with autoimmune diseases and all types of diseases and conditions. And as in our case, of course, endocrinian disruptors, we've been talking about those for several years. One observation that we can make is that it takes time before these new discoveries, yes, of course, it calls for research, it calls for the right research, but even after the right and the good research and certain probative evidence, of course, the researchers and the physicians have to circumscribe the disease and which are the diagnostic criteria leading to the diagnosis. Even at that, it calls for time before it gets instilled and integrated into the medical practice. And during all this time, there's these talks about it's not true, it can't be, it's not true, which are sad, but unfortunately, that's how it works. In medicine, we need the right evidence, but we have examples of diseases that have been described and characterized for a long time, rare diseases that were not very studied. And I will address this, the one for which too many people call us is one of the conjunctive tissue, which is not diagnosed. And there are others as well. Now we're talking about activation syndrome, nasocystry, activation syndrome. And there is more and more knowledge and international groups and clinical studies, but our physicians here are not aware of the latest discoveries and the latest criteria that are to be established. We can't really blame them in the sense, will they read on this disease, on new research? No. However, we will address this in the workshop. How can we approach a physician to provide new things as you attempted to do? Therefore, this is what we want to discuss in the workshop, among other things. So thank you. Thank you for your testimonial that we do hear at times. And I will take one last question before we move on. Audrey Sasville. Hello, can you hear me? Yes. Well, I've been in diagnostic errancy for at least 3 years. I found myself one of the diagnoses because I think there are several. I was diagnosed with a coat, and I think I have a SED and diasotomy. And now I'm not a physician, but just for my blood diagnosis, I went to see several physicians who said, no, ma'am, you don't have that tachycardia. That's really tied to anxiety. And I would fight and I would say, no, it can't be. It's impossible. And you know, I mean, sometimes my heart rate will exceed 180 just by exerting a little bit of cardio. And at the same time, I went to see a cardiologist who told me, ma'am, you really have this syndrome. And I had several syncopes, discomfort. I went to the ER not too long ago. A cardiologist said, ma'am, it must be anxiety. I'm not sure you have this syndrome. And I said, moreover, I have a diagnosis, and this is and the diagnosis that I have, you don't understand it. And so I'm not afraid of speaking out. So physicians don't really like me. I'm pretty much fed up because I'm at a point where I have to see a psychiatrist who's saying, oh, it's just a functional neurological disorder. And so all these discomforts are psychosomatic, whereas I have hyper, I don't know how you call it, but I'm super flexible. I have major pain, and I have almost all of the SIV symptoms. And then a specialist dropped me, and I'm left to myself. I was supposed to see somebody in September. We're almost in March, and I still haven't seen the specialists I was supposed to see. And I figure, certainly we're not alone living this, experiencing this powerlessness. I decided to create a group on Facebook, a private group called Quebec Diagnostic Errancy. We are 71 in this group within Diagnostic Errancy, and we're not validated and confirmed by the medical corps, and we experience distress and hopelessness. And I read several testimonials by people who are left to themselves. They were placed in psychiatry, and they were invalidated as being in pain and suffering. And this impacts on me deeply. And so I'm asking people to reach this group, the Diagnostic Errancy group on Facebook. Thank you. I need to keep with the schedule, but I would invite you to join our community, our IRARE without a diagnosis community, because we're going to take action, and you will. And this would be a place to assist you as best as possible. The more we're mobilized, better it will be, especially if it's regarding the syndrome, and where we have reports, we have the statistics, and we're going to take action on this within the next few months. And just to get back to one point, unfortunately, in everything that I said about the psychosomatic diagnosed individuals, for the wide majority, it's women, and often the symptoms are non-specific as the ones that you mentioned: tachycardia, dizziness, vertigo, migraines, pain. But when it involves many of these symptoms combined, we have to search, we have to identify these, and there's more and more literature becoming available. There was another edition in a scientific journal 2 weeks ago, and we made the connection with dysautonomia and with this syndrome. And so there's literature, there are international groups that work on this. And unfortunately, I can say it, even myself, I'm considered to be somewhat crazy to always speak of this condition and to put it forth. It's part of those diseases that some people claim they do not believe, between quotation marks. Today, we're going to want to talk about that. And in the world of those without a diagnosis, we have to be able to bring ourselves to be able to discuss it with the medical corps, to at least discuss it, that there not be any biases that will prevent us from doing so from the get-go. Thank you so much to all those of you who dared provide their testimonial. We know that on a Saturday morning, bright and early, and we're here all day on Zoom, and we're probably fed up with Zoom, but this was our goal, to hear you and to find a way how you can help yourself and how we can help you.